Hey all, Toast here from War Games on Toast, and today we are evening the playing field. We are talking about the great equalizer in WARCRY. More specifically, we are expanding our Gambit tool belt and taking steps to becoming the tactical genius you know you are destined to become. What do you mean WARCRY has an issue? Before I reveal what WARCRY's great equalizer is, it's important to understand why WARCRY 1 needs an equalizer and 2 has one baked in already that often gets overlooked. Now when I say overlooked, I mean it's very easy to look at profiles like the Deathbringer, or Varangard, or Vexmore, or whatever big scary thing is the talk of the town at any given moment, and then slap that bad boy into a vacuum. For the record, this doesn't actually apply to monsters because monsters are their own kettle of fish that need their own specific tools to deal with, and they will not be covered or really referenced at all going forward in this video. This is for literally everything else. But regardless, in a vacuum, the response of, that lad's too big, he's too scary to fight, whatever could I do? It's common. It's easy to proclaim something as good, powerful, or even overpowered when you plonk it into perpetual magical Christmas land, when you look at it from the ideal scenario every single time. But ultimately, most things in WARCRY can be dealt with, and this is typically done with the use of tools. Do you have a net to stop things from moving? Do you have a means to slow down your opponent so they can't get around the board as effectively? Do you have mountains of renewable chaff to bog it down? Can you push or can you pull them out of or into better or worse positions? Many warbands have these tools, but importantly, not all warbands have these tools, and that's where this tactical nugget really comes into play. Now, I am not going to keep this secret from you for much longer, but I am sure some people have already gleaned what the solution to this problem is. That's right, you take a baseball bat and you take out their knee. To get my point across, I will be going over to TTS to provide a visual to help with the ramble, and I will be going over 4 games that I have had that highlight this solution in what I think is a pretty perfect manner. But enough babbling though, the great equalizer in WARCRY is, it's terrain. It's always been terrain. If you made it this far, thank you for supporting the channel and enjoying the content that I produce. If you want to help the channel further, please consider subscribing to the channel. If you want to go one step beyond, then you can also sign up to my Patreon or my YouTube members for as low as £1 a month, or one of your local regional currencies, dollary dues, euros, whatever. You will gain access to content early, some behind the scenes stuff, and the occasional ramble for good measure. With that out of the way, back to the show. So we are in TTS, and it's time to go over why terrain throws every spanner you could possibly imagine into the works and does a great job of messing with the playing field. First things first, I am going to start with the Road to Defiant, where my Dragon Ogre based Beasts of Chaos went toe to toe with Star Soul Maced Paladins. Beasts of Chaos are a good enough warband, however Dragon Ogres are not so great ultimately, and my list was a bit pants as a result. My opponent however was newer to the game but was running a Warhammer Worlds topping Warrior Chamber list that was packing a fair few Star Soul Maced Paladins, and these are terrifying considering they have 48 profiles, and this was a combination mission of objective, kill, and treasure. And when you consider that 2/3 of that is a kill mission because treasure missions and kill missions are just kill missions, well, I was in a bit of a uphill struggle, and the terrain, as a reference here, was heavily ruins based, like you can see on the board now. Now this isn't the exact loadout of the terrain that we were using at the time, however this is, you know, kind of similar, and really all we need is this little bit over here, which is really important for this example because this is the bit of terrain that I've placed in here as a representation of how this game really went and why it boiled down in my favor so effectively, at least in a very small scale. In this corner of the board, it was dominated by this bit of terrain and clever use of said terrain. So we have our 2 Star Soul Maced Paladins, okay? These are kind of spooky boys. We don't want to mess up Star Soul Maced Paladins, and these guys came in on turn 2. Okay, so on turn 1, I have some guys over here somewhere in the middle, and there's a treasure here. That's kind of important. I kind of want to get there. However, there's also 2 paladins I know are coming in and walking on from the board on turn 2. I believe it's from this corner. Okay, so it's a little bit far to get there, but they're going to pop on roughly here, and that's kind of scary. Now, I want this treasure token. Additionally, I want to not be immediately murdered. Okay, so what we did was, simply what I did and how this worked was on turn 1, I went through the door. Remember, always look for doors in terrain. Okay, so there's a door here. So my gauze basically went through the door over here. Had a good time. They came in through here, through the door, and using my abilities, I was able to get a free move as well. So we went through the door, we picked up the treasure, and we even climbed up here. It's kind of spicy. And in fact, all of my gauze ended up on this platform, roughly like this. So there's no actual space. There wasn't any space. There's not really any space for the paladins to actually get a purchase on this terrain, so they can't really climb up. And this is the idea. We are defending this goal from the rampages of these paladins. Turn 2 comes around, and my guy, I'm doing things over here. I've got Dragon Ogres doing Dragon Ogre things, and it's all going down. But over here is where we are trying to secure out this treasure that if I hadn't taken, well, these paladins would have absolutely just messed up my face, and I can't escape. Remember, this is a full battlefield that I haven't positioned here, but he's got men over here, he's got guys over here. Running away is running into danger. Okay, so it's escaping towards more paladins and more Stormcast, and Stormcast are slow, but so is my Gore now. He's holding a treasure token, so you've got to bear that in mind. Now, what happened was my opponent came in. As you do, she wants the treasure token, so he sends his guys up. However, they can't get up here. Okay, so with a move, they can get to the wall. With another move, they can climb. Okay, but due to more accurate placement, it was more accurate at the time, she couldn't get up here and legally place. You have more than half your base over the terrain, bonk, falls down. So they couldn't climb up. They could only position themselves for next turn. So one paladin was here, ready to climb this wall, and one paladin rushed over here to potentially climb this wall for next turn. Well, this is turn 2. So on turn 2, nothing happened. I saw this guy up here. These guys are completely fine. I waited with them. They were having a good time. Turn 2 comes around. Well, what do they do? Well, they have to climb, but they can't get a purchase. So you've got to spend a whole action to climb up to then make a swing. That's not efficient. And in fact, even with 3 attacks at 4-8 damage, my gauze can reduce that damage by 1 with their reaction. So I was able to react to that one swing, and spoiler, they survived. Basically, they need a crit and a hit to land the kill, even with the reaction. However, my opponent just didn't roll any crits, so this gauze survived on like 1 wound. Oh no. And this gauze survived on like 7. Bit lucky there. And once again, this guy is completely safe, which is kind of spicy. Well, what happens next? Well, that's turn 3. Nothing's really happened. Turn 4 comes about, and this guy dies, and this guy dies, and they still couldn't get up there. And my guy stood there the whole game and won. Right? I had the treasure. These 2 guys with a bit of terrain managed to hold off these paladins. And frankly, even had this guy died in the end, it doesn't massively matter because 1/3 of this warband has been distracted by like 180 points of gore. Right? Like one of these guys is almost 180 points by themselves. Some of these were blessed as well, for the record. And they were all blessed with +1 strength. So these were all 180 points. Okay. So this is 1/2 of the warband going against this. These guys are worth as much as one of these guys. And they held them off basically all game. Had my opponent sent more guys over here, that's terrible value. They didn't do that, which is a good thing. That's what something you don't want to do, is to send even more points into this tiny group of guys just hurtling up on top of here. Okay, so they didn't do that, but you know, they needed to get this point back, and I held it off with a ruin and 3 bits of chaff. And there you go. Now, if this ruin wasn't here, Okay, in the theoretical magical Christmas land that we often judge things in, we'll just plonk this somewhere else, thank you, for later on. In the magical Christmas land that we often live in, these paladins into these 3 go, they just die. They just die, right? They go in, they tie this guy up so he can't disengage, they beat him down, they beat him down, they beat him down, and they move on. And this will likely happen by turn 3, and then I kind of lose, right? I lose that treasure, I lose a chunk of my warband, and now I'm getting pincered. Okay, so small scale, on the smaller scale, I managed to distract 2 guys. On the slightly larger scale, I managed to distract 3 guys and also hold the treasure. But on a overarching game scale, these 3 paladins never joined the rest of their friends. So preventing that consolidation of power. I talked about consolidation of power a lot in my last video about Tyrannic Cohort. Preventing the consolidation of power meant I was able to then do other things over here more freely. So the distraction paid off. And it was all thanks to our Lord and Saviour, this L-shaped ruin. Now this L-shaped ruin comes into play in another example, which I'm going to go over now. So this was in the Road to Defiant tournament in Scotland. However, there was another game I had at Warhammer World, which was equally as nonsensical, shall we say. So you can imagine. So this game was against WARCRY UK's own Wild Dice's finest Lord Phylax, and not to pick on Lord Phylax at all, he is a wonderful player. However, this game was a pretty darn good example of using terrain to foil his plans, especially, again, these guys are movement 3. We'll go into why movement 3 is such a hindrance specifically with terrain. Again, those Star Soul Maces were movement 3, and the Caradon are largely movement 3 as well. So basically, what happened was, he had a big scary guy. Oh no, this big boy has a big hammer. He wants to kill my guy. Okay, specifically Zondara, because Zondara is the key to my game plan. She is my necromancer, she has the resurrect, she interacts with my zombies. I have 4 tiles here. You will not have 4 tiles in real life. These are just placeholder zombies, okay? But she has great synergies within her Bladeborn, and she's a fantastic leader in Soulblight in general. I also had a Lost Lane, which will come into play a little on. And we also have this unusually sculpted secondary Admiral we will also go into in just a little bit. But in short, Admiral walks onto the board. I am kind of spooked. I have a Zondara. Zondara is about to die. So what do? Well, Zondara just goes up here. Okay. For the record, Phylax does have a rampage here. Okay, so this is also scary. Rampaging would have absolutely destroyed Zondara here. Terrain slows him down, especially when you plonk a zombie here. In a similar fashion to before. Now, I played this slightly differently because I actually left a space for him to get up. I could absolutely place this zombie a bit more aggressively, or place these guys in such a way that Phylax couldn't have actually climbed up and he would have fallen down. I actually wanted him to come up, and we'll get into that. Why and why I should use terrain to be a bit of a twat sometimes. So we have our Zondara over here. We have our tile over here. We've got a Lost Lane. Just kind of vibing over here. Okay. So we have this Admiral. He just trundles on. He does his rampage. But he can't get his Zondara because walls, terrain going ups, all that kind of thing. And we have our zombie, which is allowing him to climb up here, but preventing him from getting his Zondara. This is the distraction zombie, in a similar way to where we had the Gore being the distraction Gore to protect the treasure carriers. In this case, we have the distraction zombie. Okay, Admiral rampages, uses a ton of movement, of course, to get up this wall, has to then use more movement to get up here, and now they have like 2 swings. Okay, one swing goes into tile. Tile survives because, again, unfeeling flesh, like with Bestial Resilience, makes it harder to die. Plus, a 4-4-3-5 profile isn't hugely reliable anyway at killing a zombie. So zombie survives the first swing, dies to the second swing. Oh no. That's kind of bad. Zondara is exposed, but Zondara is very much alive. And now this Admiral is up here. Before we get into what happened next, the terrain being here is very important. Had the terrain not been here, the Admiral was more free to get to Zondara in many ways. Many ways is Zondara more exposed. Firstly, the zombie can't do shit. as simple as that, the zombie can be ignored. He can go around, okay? There is more space to move around than on a narrow platform where that is simply not possible. They are essentially put into a very small corridor of operations where you can have a zombie to block the path. Secondly, without having to climb this terrain, my opponent had more means to just get into combat without using actions to move in the first place. For example, they could have just rampaged straight in and gotten in there and then swung 3 times and bopped Zondara. Even if that wasn't the case, they could have rampaged in, bopped that guy, and then moved for next turn into position to bop Zondara on the next turn. However, as we saw before, that couldn't have happened because of the action burning from climbing and the distance travelled. It simply meant that they had to plonk himself there, kill the zombie, and then there was this nice old little gap where I could escape on my next turn, which is the ideal scenario if you don't have a lost fill in nearby. We'll get into that in just a smidge. And secondly, right, climbing is just a nuisance. It's a nuisance to deal with because it's really inefficient. It's super inefficient for your opponent. Of course, I used movement to get up here. That's inefficient as well, technically. However, I used it for massive efficiency later on, whereas my opponent just has to deal with this hurdle. Okay, they're only going, you know, about an inch. Okay, but they've spent about 3 inches up and then an inch in. Okay, they've spent 3 to 4 to maybe even 5 inches of movement to go 1 inch. That is super inefficient in terms of just getting around the board. So this is all wins in my book, especially when Lost Fill In gets up here next because he's awesome and then kills that guy immediately. Okay, this was the bait. So this is more specific to this warband, but since we're here, the bait was Zondara up here. Lost Fill In can fly, basically, so he can get up there without any issues. So the bait was, come kill Zondara. She's kind of good. You want to kill Zondara, you kill a zombie. That's kind of sad, but Fill In flies up there and then, you know, just murderizes the Arkanaut Admiral. And that's the end of the Admiral. That scored me a lot of points, and Zondara survived to cause issues later on. Enter Second Admiral, the Second Admiral. So if you imagine we have a lot more of these guys on the board, we have a bunch of pistols, essentially. Ooh, it's rain. A bunch of pistols moving up. Zondara's been shot a few times. She's up here. She's getting peppered with bullets. And a Second Admiral is on the way. This terrain, by the way, didn't have a door, so ignore the door here. Second Admiral is on the way. Second Admiral's pretty scary. Zondara's had to retreat down to here because she's getting shot, and this is blocking terrain. Always nice to have. You could have 4, 5, 6, 7 guns here, but if you can't see things, those guns are worthless in other virtual terrain. It blocks line of sight. It's very useful for that too. Zondara's down here. It's kind of spooky. The only path to Zondara is through here, or through here in this case. And Admiral number 2, the Caradon Boogaloo, makes his way. And now we are in danger. And thankfully, this chokehold, again, chokeholds are important. We'll go over it in a little bit. This chokehold's massively important. Now, I can't run away because Arkanaut has gun. He could just shoot me, 6 times. I could likely die there. So the solution here is to, of course, have this rather wonderful chokehold hold a zombie. Again, this is Soul Blight specific, but Soul Blight also don't have access to nets. They don't have access to a lot of things that can prevent big scary things like a 3-5 murder hobo admiral on the way to smash your head in. So we do what we can. We revive a zombie into combat with the admiral. Now the admiral can't shoot because it's over there. If the admiral disengages, it's half the shots into Zondara, so less likely to kill. And of course, if he kills a zombie, he can't move and attack unless he has Rampage, which is unlikely. Additionally, on top of that, Zondara then moved over here. So in this instance, after the revive, Zondara could have been shot in any case. So zombie revived here, blocked away. Zondara can't be shot. Zondara is completely safe because there is a wall of impassable terrain or difficult to overcome terrain and a zombie in contact. Now I say it's impassable because it's not impassable. Theoretically, you could just climb over here and take a bonk if you weren't movement 3, if you weren't already in combat, because remember, if you disengage, you cannot climb terrain. So it's kill the zombie or do nothing. And killing the zombie is the same as doing nothing. This bit of terrain, in 2 instances, completely sealed the deal for this game. This was a very hard game, but this handy bit of terrain is basically why Zandara survived the whole game and I didn't concede a whole bunch of points on her being dead. And her not being dead earlier in the game meant she was up here and able to snipe things with her wizard bolt, killing off or severely injuring a fair few dwarfs in the process, also contributing to my win of the game. All hail this bit of terrain. So on to game 3, and not to bully Lord Fireaxe, he's a wonderful player, but we've just had a few games recently and not so recently where terrain has been a real sticking point to his success. We have Sylvaneth versus Ironjaws. Again, not the whole battlefield. This isn't huge. These aren't the actual bits of terrain. Basically, it was good terrain, but with a very handy little gap between them over here. That was a bit of a chokehold, and they're close to here. So this is just a visual representation of said terrain and how you can use terrain to really help, especially if it's quite blocking, like this was in this example. You can actually find this game on stream from about 2 weeks ago. So if you want to check out that game, you can. It was a really good game. So we had a thug, essentially, here. So a lot of things happened prior to this going down. But we had a thug. We had some little guys on either side. And he had a Morgok coming in with an Ardboy. And I had a Tree Revenant. A Kernoth Huntmaster, basically. Okay, so this is the situation. It was a treasure mission to boot, so we can just throw some treasure markers on these two over here, and we have a Mega Boss coming in over here, making his way over here. We actually need a bit more terrain than this. We had a few more bits of terrain that was making it a bit more. Again, it wasn't this exact loadout, but there was a fair chunk of terrain as per usual that was fairly large, that was making it a bit more awkward for him to get around. But the main focus is over here. So we have Thug. Thug came on, and Thug is on turn 2, and Thug wants to go over here to beat up these elves. These elves have treasure markers. They want to be killed so he can win the game. They are not going to be killed. Spoiler, they are over in this corner. But he can definitely get to them because he deploys here, he deploys over here, and they're making their way over to here. We have an issue. We have essentially a corridor again. We have this rather wonderful corridor, this rather wonderful little gap here. So all that really happened here was that this Revenant fell back because Thug is scary. To basically move this block away. This Revenant stayed here. Morgok moved out a bit. I got a bit lucky. We also netted Morgok, and we'll get into why combining things, like we saw before, resurrections in terrain to cause roadblocks, and nets and terrain to cause roadblocks. So this guy here is going to die. Okay, he's not actually engaged because he's got big old range. He's going to die. This is a Thug. Thug is quite good at killing chaff. I don't want Thug to kill both of them, hence disengage to here to move the roadblock further, still preventing complete access to my treasure carriers and giving me a fallback if everything collapses. Next, the next roadblock, I have made him a roadblock to his own reinforcements. This net on Thug. Thug is big. This Ardboy can't get around. Now he can, if he climbs and does this old little rigmarole to get over. Ardboys are slow, and that would take a rush to really do. Effectively, it was inefficient, and Fireaxe just didn't do it, which is fair. It's resource intensive when he has other things to do, such as getting this guy over here and killing this guy and not being killed by him. There's a lot of things going on, and none of them are good for him. So inevitably, this Spite Revenant does bite the bucket, which is all sad. It happens though. But also, it was inevitable. It's a Spite Revenant. And Thug then gets royally whomped by the Huntmaster, because Huntmasters are pretty darn good at killing Ironjaws, especially when I have blessed -+1 strength. So we now have this scenario where Morgok is in a terribly bad position. I have it's actually a Huntmaster, so ignore the fact that he's got 20, he's got 32 wounds. So he's a Huntmaster. Where can Morgok go? What can Morgok do to really impact the board state? Well, the net clears. This checks out. Morgok is in a bad spot. Morgok can go over here. Okay, this is a pretty big distance though. So, you know, one, he can't charge from here. He's got to move first. Then he's got to charge, but he's still actually not in range to attack. So it's like move, charge. He's just not in range to really engage despite Revenant. So its only real target is the Huntmaster, and the Huntmaster does actually just move in. He moves in just to further block this way. He's physically stopping the Mega Boss if he actually wants to come down here, which he doesn't do because that would be very silly. But he's stopping reinforcements coming this way. He's also physically impeding Morgok. Morgok is physically impeding his own reinforcements, and this guy's just sitting there in case it all goes wrong. Of course, he has a net, so if this guy does die, lob a net, you're good to go. And again, turns go by, turns are passing by. By the time Morgok even dreams of getting through all this, game's over. He can't get here. And then it comes down to the war boss and this guy's big ass pie plate. Of course, I haven't populated the field with more terrain, but the war boss has a lot, and as well, the war boss was deployed for the forward using sneaky techniques. So the war boss has to move. Okay, it's around in the corner, a good 21 inches. And he comes on turn 2. He's only moving 3, right? So he's got 3 turns. Three turns at 6 inches of movement, essentially, to get there. That's only 18. With Rush, he might get there. With War, he could get there. But these are all resources he might not have available to him. And, you know, it's just bad news bears. So, realistically, these guys are safe largely because they were cowardly and used terrain to hide from this very slow-moving Mega Boss, and using terrain thanks to this wonderful little corridor created via actual official Games Workshop WARCRY cards. Again, not these exact terrain pieces, to create this corridor that I use to just plonk a laddie right there and make it really difficult for my opponent to do anything. And the urge, I understand the urge. So the urge, of course, is to just throw everything in here. Okay, the danger of this kind of thing is that your roadblock could collapse faster. Okay, you want to use terrain because terrain doesn't require dice to work. Terrain just exists. It's great. It's a constant in that specific game. Okay, throwing dice is random. Thug could have killed these both in one turn, and then this actually leaves this secondary roadblock. There isn't one. So theoretically, there could have been an instance where he got guys through here and the roadblock fails. So not doing that and being conservative and just disengaging and redeploying the roadblock further back, still maintaining it but further back, meant that he had to go through the guys piecemeal. He had to kill this guy and then he would die. Then he comes in, then he's blocked off by this guy. And he's going through a lot of just things that are annoying. He doesn't want to kill these. These things are worthless to him because they don't have objectives. And they're worthless to me because they don't have objectives. So at this point, this is functionally wasted time in my favor, and it's thanks to terrain again. And of course, we can't deny at this point, you may deny, Caradon maybe not the most killy thing in the game. Star Soul Maces may not be the most competitive thing. However, Iron Jaws are one of the killiest things in the game. How you deal with Morgok, how you deal with Mega Bosses is very important. These things are very dangerous. If you don't have the means to deal with them, you are boned. Now, I did have a net in this case, which did absolutely help. But even had that net failed, this would have still went off roughly the same. Morgok would have still been delayed multiple times by Revenants, by Huntmasters, and being delayed, and thus keeping these guys safe. The net was nice. It certainly helped. It wasn't game winning. It was just helpful to assist the terrain play. The terrain 100% was the reason this game went so smoothly, and utilizing it is also why it went so smoothly. So those were some real life examples of terrain being fantastic, but let's use the last little bit of this video to really dive into why terrain is so important when it comes to avoiding big scary stuff and ultimately improving your game. Basically, it's just a hurdle that they have to cross, whether it's literally a piece of terrain that they have to climb over or go around, or it's a big stonking ruin or tree formation that you can use to create a difficult to overcome barrier or a choke point. Ultimately, if your opponent has to spend more movement or even actions getting to you and then doing you dirty, the better that is for you. And we saw this specifically in Game 2 against Caradon Overlords, where I go over that climbing is really inefficient, because to go 1 inch of space, you have to actually spend 4 inches because you've got to go up 3 and all that nonsense. It's inefficient. And in Game 1, when your opponent has to do that over and over again with those paladins, it's just amplifying that inefficiency turn on turn on turn, and it's difficult to deal with, and it's really annoying for your opponent. And sadly, terrain is so often overlooked, but verticality in particular is ignored the most from my experience. Verticality is often just seen as a thing that's there. It's a fancy visual that people don't interact with unless they have big gun, because big gun like big platform on big trees so they can shoot little guys from big high, and that's the only time you see people climbing anything, is to shoot things with better line of sight. And that is of course an advantage of terrain, but it's not the only advantage of verticality. Case in point, Game 1 and Game 2. And as we saw before, nearly everything in WARCRY can benefit from a little bit of verticality if used at the right time. It's an excellent way to escape a bad situation and force your opponent to interact with you in ever-increasing degrees of awkwardness. But that's not all. Verticality is the hardest of counters to cavalry, because most cavalry is mounted, and mounted things can't climb. And this means that, you know, one of the most common terrors of the WARCRY battlefield is of course the Varangard. Since the dawn of 2nd edition, the Varangard has been a terror, a tormentor of all, and it's not actually that scary if you climb a tree. It can't get to you. It has a 1 inch range or a 2 inch range based on the type it is. Climb the tree, stand on a platform. They can't attack you, they can't get up there. You are functionally immortal, and if you time this climb effectively so they come in to attack you and then, you know, then you climb, then they've moved over there and wasted their time. They've now got to spend more time going somewhere else, and you've just delayed them, which is of course incredibly powerful. And of course all terrain bar low terrain will slow down cavalry, because they can't climb over barricades, they can't jump over them, they've got to go around them unless it's low terrain. And spoiler, low terrain is less common than you might think, because low terrain is terrain less than 1 inch. And if you're playing with primarily Games Workshop terrain, there's very little terrain that is 1 inch. And of course low terrain can apply to different parts of one large terrain piece, but even the barricades in most of Games Workshop's terrain isn't actually low. This means they can't go over them, they've got to go around them. And one of the more common pieces of GUR terrain specifically is like a little rock formation with like 2 little trees. I'll put it on screen, shabadoosh. Only the rock bit is low terrain. The actual trees, of course, are not. They are well above 1 inch, which means that if your base can't fit through the gap in the middle because it's too big, a la nearly all cavalry, and things like mega bosses or Kurnoth Hunters or Morgoths or Paladins or whatever, if you can't fit your base, physically fit it through that gap, then you can't legally use that as low terrain. You have to go around, or you have to climb the actual trees themselves. So defining and recognizing what low terrain is really helps you then look at the battlefield and go, ah, these are a whole bunch of hurdles that I'm now aware of and I can use to my advantage potentially. Of course, your opponent could do that too, but let's be fair here. I'm making this video for a reason, people don't really use terrain all that effectively. Now, I just touched on large bases, but large bases are balanced entirely by the fact that terrain is an absolute nightmare for them. Big bases have to spend more movement to move their sheer bulk over hurdles and barricades. Mega bosses are the biggest example. Mega bosses are massive pie plates, as they hold a fucking dinner dish in your hand and going to a fucking carvery. That's basically the size of the mega boss's base. And this guy's also slow. And even small hurdles can be a nightmare to navigate. Going around it takes longer. Going over it, if you are not positioned correctly when you first move because of, terrain is kind of weird like that, you might just not have the perfect magical Christmas land vacuum of, I'm just going to climb over it. You might be a little bit further back from it. Well, your movement 3 isn't actually enough to move to it and climb over it. Right? If you're even further back, moving twice might not be enough to do that, which means you're just wasting movement by moving there and then just waiting because you can't cross it. And it's could be the most efficient way over that is to actually just do nothing for your second action, or, use 1 inch of your second action just to hug it for next turn. It's incredibly difficult to move a mega boss and things of similar sizes around the board. Basically, the bigger your base, the more difficult it is for you to navigate the world of WARCRY. Now, unfortunately, all of this is just theory, because all of this falls apart if you don't run WARCRY games with enough terrain. WARCRY is a game built, it's balanced around having all of this terrain on the board, and if you don't have it, oh no. And granted, terrain is expensive, so on a casual level, this can be difficult to amass enough terrain. On a competitive level, if you're a tournament organizer, having enough terrain to fill 10, 15, 20 boards worth of, adequately dense terrain, this is a large expense. It's hard to do. And unfortunately, in my time, I have seen lots of tables that just don't have enough terrain. And frankly, those kind of tournaments should have less tables to more effectively densify their boards, because in those games you see massive murder models running around doing whatever they want, and that analysis vacuum that I mentioned before isn't just magical Christmas land, that's the reality, because there's not enough stuff to slow them down. There's not enough tactical nuance in positioning because it's largely fucking flat. In short, they are untethered, unhindered, and you are about to be unalived. A healthy mixture of line of sight blocking, chunky, tall, scatter, terrain, whatever it is vital to a tactically rich and balanced game of WARCRY, and I wholeheartedly recommend that you use more if your table is looking a little bit barren, and then go into every game and look at the terrain, look for those choke points, those awkward bits of scatter terrain, and always keep your eye to the sky for some sneaky shenanigans, because terrain can be the thing that wins you the game, or at the very least helps you dominate key sectors of a battlefield to help you win the game in other places. It is so important, and if you effectively use terrain to your advantage, your win rate will go up and you will improve as a player. But that's the end of this video. Hopefully this has helped newer players understand the nuances of terrain, and maybe even help veterans consider the virtues of hiding up a tree. Let me know in the comments down below if there's anything you want me to cover next, and whilst you're down there, hit that like button and hit subscribe, as it really helps the channel out. Until next time, lads, ladies, and everybody in between and beyond, ta-ra. Hey all, Toast here, and welcome to the post-toast credits. A massive shout out to all of my patrons and members, but an extra special shout out to all my algorithmic demon slayers: ABUNDCD, Andy Morris, blah blah blah, Brioche, Head Knight of Paint, Heinz D, Lord Phylax, Maps, Paulo Fernando Conclavis Perez for Hero, Sable Saber, Steve Bean, Houston Toad, and Velas. Thank you so much for supporting the channel, and I'll catch you all next time.